In lecture 1 of the notes for the muscular system, I want to talk about two things pretty much. I want to talk about just an overview of the different types of muscle tissue and then also the microscopic anatomy of muscle cells. There are three different types of muscle cell. There is skeletal muscle, which is the muscle attached to your skeletal system, the muscle that can move your bones. You also have cardiac muscle, that's the muscle that makes up your heart, and smooth muscle, which makes up the lining of many of your internal organs and blood vessels. Muscle cells are called fibers, and that's because all muscle cells are elongated. They're sort of a stretched out shape. They all contain myofilaments, which are long strands of protein, and myofilaments is what allows muscles to be able to contract. The types of myofilaments are actin and myosin, and we'll talk about how those work more in the second lecture. You're going to see myo and sarco a lot in this unit. Just a heads up about the prefixes. Myo means muscle, sarco means flesh. All muscle cells have four common characteristics. They all have excitability, also known as irritability. This just means that they have the ability to react to a stimulus. This is going to be generally a stimulus from your nervous system, telling your muscle to contract. The muscles all have contractibility, meaning that they can shorten. And this is how they cause movement in your body. And then muscle cells have extensibility and elasticity. These two characteristics really go together. Extensibility means that the muscle can be stretched, and then elasticity, it will go back to its original size once it's released. So similar to a rubber band can be stretched because it has extensibility, but when you let it go, it's going to return to its original shape. Okay, on this slide we can see pictures of the three different types of muscle fibers. Up top we have the skeletal muscle. Those are striated, meaning they kind of have a stripy appearance. Cardiac in the middle, also stripy or striated. Cardiac muscle, though, you can tell is more branched than skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle at the bottom has no striations. It's not stripy, which is why it's called smooth. If you're looking at the nuclei, skeletal muscle has multiple nuclei per fiber. Cardiac muscle and smooth muscle both have only one nucleus per cell. We can categorize muscle fibers based on whether they are fast twitch or slow twitch. And this classification is basically what it sounds like. So fast twitch muscles contract quickly, whereas slow twitch muscles contract slowly. Skeletal muscle tends to have a mixture of fast and slow twitch fibers. So for example, your bicep muscle is made up of lots and lots of muscle fibers. Some of them are fast twitch, some of them are slow twitch. The main difference is that fast twitch are capable of producing powerful, fast movements, but fast twitch muscles tire more quickly, whereas slow twitch muscles produce slower movements, but they have better endurance. Cardiac muscles in general are mostly fast twitch fibers. Smooth muscles tend to have primarily slow twitch fibers. Here are some general functions of muscle. Skeletal muscle is primarily involved in movement of our bones. It also helps to maintain posture and to stabilize joints. Cardiac muscle is responsible for pumping blood, and smooth muscle moves material through your body. All muscle, as it's moving and burning fuel, is giving off heat. So one of the main sources of body heat is actually the activity of your muscles. Okay, here's a quick question for you. Answer this before I tell you the answer. Which of the following is not a characteristic of all muscle cells? If you want to think about it for a minute or look back through your notes, you can pause the video now. And the correct answer is striated. Not all muscle cells are striated. Can you name a type of muscle that is not striated? That's right, smooth muscle is not striated. So for the majority of this unit, we're going to be talking about skeletal muscles. And what I want to talk about now is just the general structure of a skeletal muscle. So skeletal muscle consists of skeletal muscle fibers, which are muscle cells. And remember that when we have a group of cells working together to do a job, we call that a tissue. So skeletal muscles bundle together into muscle tissue. Those tissues bundle together into the muscle, which is an organ, and those muscles then attach to the skeleton. When muscles shorten, the skeleton moves. So here's what that looks like in a diagram. Muscle fiber you can see is sticking out here. We've got one muscle fiber. Notice that it's striated. That one muscle fiber is bundled together into a tissue called a fascicle. And then we have many fascicles all bundled together to make up the whole muscle. Here's some vocabulary that relates to the muscle at the level of the organ. So we have our muscle fibers, remember, our individual cells. Each muscle fiber is surrounded by connective tissue known as endomysium. Endo, remember, means within or inner. So endomysium are the inner wrappings around each individual muscle cell. Together, a bunch of muscle fibers wrapped up in their individual endomysia will make a fascicle. And a fascicle is a bundle of muscle fibers. Fascicles are then wrapped up in another layer of connective tissue known as perimysium. And when you have a bunch of fascicles, they're going to be all wrapped together inside of an epimysium to make the whole muscle. So let's go back to the diagram, and you can see where those connective tissues are. So here's our muscle fiber, and around each muscle fiber we have the endomysium. Bundle all of them together into a fascicle, and around the fascicle we have the perimysium. And then you can see that we have lots of fascicles here, all tied up together in the epimysium. The epimysium then blends into a connective tissue attachment. There are two basic shapes for connective tissue attaching muscle to bone. There are tendons, which are sort of cord-like structures. They are formed from the epimysium. Sometimes you'll see that the connective tissue is more sheet-like, sort of a white sheet that covers a greater area of a muscle. Those are called aponeuroses. You'll frequently see examples of those around trunk muscles. Okay, here you have a little review activity. So here we have a muscle. I'd like you to figure out which vocab term goes with which number. Pause if you want to before I give you the answers. Number 1, you should have come up with, that is the muscle fiber. Number 2 is the endomysium. Number 3 is the perimysium. And number 4 is the epimysium. This is an overview picture. This sort of shows you a comparison between a muscle fiber, which is, remember, a muscle cell, and a typical animal cell. So muscle fibers are highly specialized, but they are still animal cells. A lot of the things that you already know about animal cells still apply and are still present in the muscle fiber. To begin with, we have this chart that sort of looks at the names of structures from a typical animal cell and what the analogous structure would be in a muscle fiber. So the plasma membrane in an animal cell, we know that that is the outer membrane. The plasma membrane determines what enters and leaves the cell. In a muscle cell, that is known as a sarcolemma. In a typical animal cell, we have one nucleus. That's where genetic information is stored. And in a muscle cell, same function, but we're going to have multiple nuclei. A typical animal cell has a smooth ER. Remember, ER stands for endoplasmic reticulum. This is going to be a storage location for many different materials. In the muscle fiber, the smooth ER is known as the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and its primary function is the uptake and storage of calcium ions. So it has a very specialized function, and we give it its own name because of that. In the animal cell, the fluid that surrounds the organelles is called cytoplasm. In a muscle cell, it's called sarcoplasm. A typical animal cell has an internal structure made of proteins, and that internal structure is called the cytoskeleton. In a muscle cell, we have protein fibers again, but they're going to be myofilaments here, and they're going to be arranged in bundles so that they can actually contract the cell. The rest is very similar. A muscle cell will have more mitochondria than a regular cell, and it will have a Golgi apparatus, it will have ribosomes, rough endoplasmic reticulum, everything else that a typical animal cell needs. Here's a closer up look at the microscopic structure. Notice that the whole thing is called the muscle fiber. The sarcolemma is the outer membrane that surrounds the muscle fiber. Sarcoplasm, just like cytoplasm, it's the fluid around the organelles, except it's unique because it has a lot of glycogen stored. Glycogen is a food source for your muscles. It's going to be the fuel that they use to work. We have these red structures here, these bundles of proteins. These are called microfibrils, and the microfibrils are basically just bundles of actin and myosin. Those bundles are then surrounded by this sort of blue membrane. These are the calcium storage sacs, also known as the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So this is the storage area for calcium ions. And then, of course, we know that mitochondria is the location where energy is produced, where ATP is produced. And so a muscle cell would have to have a lot of mitochondria in order to break down food quickly and produce lots of ATP for muscle contractions. So here's a quick review question. Which structure of a muscle cell acts as a barrier between the cell and the outside environment? Pause if you want to figure this out. And answer B is the correct choice. The sarcolemma is analogous to the outer plasma membrane of an animal cell. Okay, so that concludes the first muscle lecture. In lecture 2, we'll zoom in on the myofibrils to see how they help with muscle contraction.